It's time for the podcast. Yeah, the podcast is starting.
What's a podcast?
It's all gonna be alright in the end. It's gonna be alright. And if you've got some worries, my dear little friends, please rest your busy minds, because it's finally time for stories from now and then.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Stories from Now and Then. We are back in the old library, and my name is Blunderface. Captain Blunderface. Deprecatus and I were going to play secret agents, because there's almost no one here right now, and basically we sneak around the bookshelves and surprise each other. Oh, what does that have to do with Wind in the Willows Part 2? Well, Deprecatus, I'm feeling inspired by Rat and Mole. They have a good team thing going. No, you're right, they're not secret agents at all. But the author, Kenneth Graham, was Scottish, which feels like it's connected to Scotland Yard, which sort of connects to secret agents. You're right, it needs work. There's something fishy about the connective tissue of this preamble. But before we see what Rat and Mole are up to in today's story, we have a shout out for Emmett, who is turning 8, and he's from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Emmett loves dogs, and his favorite story so far is Robin Hood. So Emmett, this story is for you. Oh, and it looks like we just got a message from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by the new official Stories from Now and Then companion coloring book, Volume 1. You can color along with the stories as you listen. And to find out more, just go to storiesfromnowandthen.com. And with that, we will pass it off to the amazing Nicola for part 2 of this awesome story. Take it away.
All right, here we go. Back to the river, back to Rat and Mole, back to the adventure. This is The Wind in the Willows, Part 2. A few days after Mole had settled happily into river life, when rowing no longer felt alarming, and the names of bends and little inlets had begun to seem familiar, the Rat announced, one bright morning, that it was time Mole met their most energetic friend.
Energetic? In what way?
Asked Mole, who had already learned that the Rat often chose his words carefully when speaking of others. In every way at once, said Rat. They followed the towpath until the river widened, then turned inland through meadows where daisies nodded in the light breeze. Before long, they came upon a handsome house standing back from the road, broad-windowed and comfortable, with lawns running wide before it. That, said Rat, is Toad Hall. They had scarcely reached the gate when the owner himself burst from the front door. Toad came hurrying toward them in a coat of remarkable cut, waving both hands as though welcoming honoured guests to a grand ceremony.
My dear fellows, my dear excellent friends, you have arrived at exactly the right moment.
This was spoken with such urgency that Mole immediately felt something important must be underway. Toad led them to the yard behind the house, where a brightly painted caravan stood, hitched to a sturdy horse.
I am setting out, declared Toad magnificently, upon a journey of freedom, adventure, and wide horizons. Road life, my dear friends, the only true life. Rat exchanged a glance with Mole that suggested he had expected nothing less. Within half an hour, they were persuaded, for Toad persuaded as naturally as other creatures breathed, and soon all three were travelling slowly along the open road. The caravan pleased Mole greatly. Toad sat proudly at the front,
holding the reins as though he had invented roads. "Observe," he said, "the dignity, the independence, the splendid romance of it all." For a while, even Rat admitted it was pleasant. The horse plodded steadily, skylarks rose from the fields, villages appeared and passed, each with cottages leaning comfortably beside the road. They halted by evening near a hedge where supper was prepared and the caravan lamps glowed softly. Mole thought it one of the most agreeable evenings of his life. But with Toad, peace rarely remained long unshaken. The next morning, while they were breakfasting by the roadside, there came from behind them a strange, throbbing sound, unlike hoofbeats or wheels. It grew louder very quickly. Then, in a rush of dust and startling noise, a motor car tore past them. It flashed by in shining metal and noise and speed, scattering hens, alarming the horse, and sending the caravan lurching sideways into the ditch. Toad stood frozen. He stared after the disappearing machine as if part of himself had gone with it. "What was that?" cried Mole, breathless. Rat, brushing dust from his coat, looked less impressed. "A motor car," he said shortly. But Toad had not moved. "A motor car," he repeated in a voice full of wonder. He said it again, more softly, as if discovering a sacred phrase. "A motor car." By noon, the caravan no longer interested him. By afternoon, he had entirely ceased speaking of road life, except to explain that caravans were slow, old-fashioned, and clearly inferior. By evening, he had declared that motor cars were the highest achievement of civilization. And by the following morning, he had abandoned the caravan altogether and was speaking only of engines, speed, horns, and the thrilling rush of the road. Rat sighed. "It has happened again," he said quietly to Mole. "What has?" "Toad has found his newest passion." Back at Toad Hall, the consequences became obvious at once. Within days, Toad owned a motor car. Then another. And then another, because the first ones had met with difficulties. These difficulties generally involved ditches, gates, frightened chickens, bent wheels, or sudden collisions with objects that had remained perfectly still while Toad approached them too quickly. Yet each mishap only deepened his enthusiasm. He would return dusty, triumphant, and slightly crooked in hat, declaring, "Magnificent! Extraordinary machine! Nearly mastered it entirely!" Then he would purchase another. Mole soon understood why Rat had spoken cautiously, for Toad possessed many admirable qualities: generosity, warmth, excitement, splendid hospitality. But he also possessed a dangerous inability to remain moderate about anything. One afternoon, Rat found him in the yard, polishing yet another machine. "This must stop," said Rat firmly. "My dear Rat, impossible," replied Toad. "Progress cannot stop." "It can if you stop buying motor cars." But Toad only smiled dreamily. "Speed," he said, patting the bonnet, "is life itself." And because speed was very nearly the opposite of river life, Rat became deeply troubled. That evening he said to Mole, "We shall need Badger." At the mention of Badger, Mole felt both curiosity and slight unease, for though he had heard much of him, he had not yet met him. "He understands Toad better than anyone," said Rat, "and Toad occasionally listens to him." "Occasionally?" Rat looked thoughtful. "Very occasionally." Outside, the evening wind moved softly through the willows, while far off, from the direction of Toad Hall, there came the sudden, sharp sound of a motor horn, followed by a crash and an indignant shout. Rat closed his eyes briefly. "Yes," he said, "we must certainly see Badger." I do hope that Badger can help. Poor Rat and Mole are so worried about their friend. Toad seems like such a fun friend to have, but he gets so excited about things that he sometimes forgets he needs to be careful. Driving cars can be lots of fun, but if you go too fast, it can be dangerous. Do you think Toad will listen? We'll have to find out next time.
Thank you, Nicola, for a most excellent part 2. You know, The Wind in the Willows is a very special story, and it's not just at the old library here. I bet it's available at a library near you. Deprecatus and I absolutely recommend that you use your library card to borrow it yourself for a few weeks. You'll love it. Remember, if you'd like a shout out, all you need to do is send us a short message on Instagram at Stories From Now and Then. You can also send us any drawings or coloring pages you've done, and we'll post them on our feed. Stories From Now and Then is narrated by Nicola Ward. I'm Captain Blunderface. Make sure you give us a follow so that you never miss an episode. Bye for now, and we'll see you all next week on
Stories from now and then.